At the pinnacle of New York's high society, billionaire CEO Victoria Kensington hosted the event of the decade. Yet, amidst the clinking champagne glasses and flashing cameras, her deaf twin daughters sat completely alone in the glittering ballroom until a stranger's silent gestures changed the trajectory of their isolated lives forever. The Kensington estate in the Hamptons was ablaze with light, a sprawling modern fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Tonight, it was the epicenter of global wealth and power. Victoria Kensington, the 34-year-old founder and CEO of Aura Innovations, a pioneer in sustainable energy technology, was hosting her annual philanthropic gala. Security was tighter than at a diplomatic summit, with private military contractors blending seamlessly into the shadows of the manicured topiary. Valets scrambled to park a fleet of Bentleys, Maybachs, and armored SUVs. Inside the grand ballroom, a string quartet played a delicate Mozart piece, utterly drowned out by the roar of the elite networking. Governors, tech magnates, and Hollywood royalty rubbed shoulders, all eager to secure a moment with Victoria. She stood near the grand ice sculpture, a vision in a sleek, midnight blue Tom Ford gown, her sharp emerald eyes missing nothing. She smiled, nodded, and negotiated multi-million-dollar green energy contracts with the effortless grace of a shark gliding through a coral reef. Yet, beneath the polished veneer, Victoria was suffocating. Her gaze kept darting toward a secluded VIP alcove framed by cascading white orchids. There, sitting at a table far too large for them, were her 7-year-old twin daughters, Mia and Sophie. They were dressed in matching pale pink Dior dresses, looking like porcelain dolls placed carefully on a shelf. And just like dolls, they were entirely separated from the world around them. Mia and Sophie had been born profoundly deaf. While Victoria had spared no expense in their care, securing the finest speech pathologists, cutting-edge cochlear implants, and elite private tutors, the girls often found the crushing, overlapping acoustics of high society events physically painful. Tonight, as they did at most of their mother's mandatory social functions, the twins had simply switched off their external processors. They were submerged in total silence, marooned on an island of wealth. A stern-faced bodyguard stood 10 feet away, keeping the press and overly enthusiastic guests at bay. The twins' nanny, a highly credentialed but emotionally distant woman named Greta, sat nearby scrolling through an iPad, occasionally glancing up to ensure the girls hadn't spilled their sparkling cider. Mia was tearing a linen napkin into minuscule shreds out of sheer boredom, while Sophie stared blankly at the swirling skirts of the ballroom dancers. No one approached them. The guests, unsure of how to interact with the deaf children of a billionaire, simply offered tight, sympathetic smiles from a distance before returning to their cocktails. Victoria's heart ached at the sight, but before she could cross the room to them, a cold voice sent a shiver down her spine. "They look miserable, Victoria." As usual, Victoria turned slowly. Standing beside her, swirling a glass of neat bourbon, was Harrison Caldwell, her ex-husband. Harrison was a venture capitalist whose charming, aristocratic exterior hid a deeply manipulative nature. Their divorce 3 years ago had been a bloody, public war over assets and control of Aura Innovations. "Harrison," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a glacial chill, "you aren't on the guest list? I'm an investor in 3 of the funds present tonight. I go where the money goes," he sneered, taking a sip of his drink. He leaned in closer, dropping the society smile. "I'm also here as a concerned father. Look at them. Paraded out for your PR, then shoved into a corner. You work 80-hour weeks, Victoria. You're shipping them off to boarding school in Switzerland next year because you can't handle them." "I am securing their future," Victoria hissed, her hands balling into fists. "And I am not sending them to Switzerland. That was a rumor you planted in the Journal." Harrison's eyes gleamed with malice. "The custody hearing is in 2 months. My lawyers are compiling quite the dossier on your maternal neglect. The erratic travel, the security threats to your company, the fact that you haven't even mastered their primary language. Tell me, Victoria, how is your ASL coming along? Can you ask them how their day was yet? Or do you still need a translator for your own flesh and blood?" The words struck her like a physical blow. It was Victoria's deepest, most agonizing secret. Despite her genius-level intellect in engineering and business, she struggled immensely with American Sign Language. Her dyspraxia made the fluid, complex motor movements of signing incredibly difficult for her to master. She could manage basic phrases, but true, expressive conversation with her daughters constantly eluded her. "Leave, Harrison, before I have security throw you off the cliff," she whispered, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I'll see you in court," he murmured, adjusting his silk tie, before disappearing into the throng of billionaires. Victoria stood frozen, fighting the sudden urge to cry. The weight of her empire, the viciousness of her ex-husband, and the crushing guilt of her daughter's isolation threatened to break her. She looked back toward the VIP table. The girls had stopped tearing the napkin. They were looking at each other, their small hands flying in rapid, frustrated ASL. They were arguing about wanting to go home. Victoria took a deep breath, preparing to excuse herself from a Saudi prince to go comfort them, when she saw a man approaching their table. Her maternal instinct flared instantly. No one bypassed the security perimeter without her explicit permission. She signaled her head of security, tapping her earpiece, and began to cut through the crowd, ready to tear the intruder apart. Nathaniel Brooks tugged uncomfortably at the collar of his rented tuxedo. At 32, he was far more accustomed to steel-toed boots, worn denim, and the smell of freshly turned earth than the suffocating scent of expensive perfumes and roasted truffles. Nathaniel was the chief landscape architect for the newly commissioned Brooklyn Green Canopy Project, a massive urban revitalization initiative heavily funded by the philanthropic arm of Aura Innovations. He had been strong-armed into attending the gala by his firm's partners, tasked with showing face to the benefactors. He felt entirely out of place, an ordinary man swimming in a sea of apex predators. His only anchor was his 6-year-old son, Leo, who was currently holding his hand and staring in wide-eyed wonder at the ceiling, covered in thousands of floating, illuminated glass spheres. "Dad, are those real stars?" Leo asked, tugging on Nathaniel's sleeve. "Just fancy light bulbs, buddy," Nathaniel said with a warm smile, crouching down to adjust Leo's miniature bow tie. "Remember the deal. 1 hour of being polite, and then we go get milkshakes at that 2-4-hour diner." Deal," Leo grinned. As Nathaniel stood back up, his eyes swept the perimeter of the room, naturally seeking the quieter edges away from the overwhelming center. That was when he spotted the VIP alcove. He saw the 2 little girls in pink dresses, sitting in a bubble of profound isolation. Nathaniel recognized the posture immediately. He had seen it for years. The slight slump of the shoulders, the way their eyes tracked the rapid mouth movements of the adults around them before glazing over with fatigue, the subtle, self-soothing gestures. He noticed they weren't reacting to the booming bass of the orchestra. His heart gave a familiar, painful ache. Nathaniel's late wife, Sarah, had been deaf. She had passed away 3 years ago from a sudden aneurysm, leaving Nathaniel to raise Leo alone. In their home, American Sign Language wasn't just an accommodation, it was their primary language, the language of their love, their jokes, and their family. Leo had been signing before he could speak. Nathaniel watched as the girls tried to communicate with their nanny. One of the twins tapped the woman's arm and signed, "Water, please, thirsty." The nanny barely looked up from her iPad, offering a distracted nod and pointing toward a towering glass pitcher out of the child's reach. She hadn't understood. The little girl's shoulders slumped further, and she withdrew her hands to her lap, defeated. Nathaniel couldn't stand it. He didn't care about the social hierarchy of the room or the imposing, muscle-bound guard glaring at anyone who stepped within a 10-foot radius. He gave Leo's hand a gentle squeeze. "Come on, Leo. Let's go say hi," Nathaniel said. He walked purposely toward the alcove. The bodyguard immediately stepped forward, raising a hand. "Sir, this is a restricted area. Guests are not permitted." Nathaniel didn't argue. He didn't even look at the guard. He kept his eyes entirely on the twins, walking past the guard's outstretched arm with a quiet, unbothered confidence that confused the security man just long enough to let them through. Nathaniel stopped at the edge of the table. Mia and Sophie looked up, their expressions guarded and weary, expecting another adult to patronize them with exaggerated, slow mouth movements. Instead, Nathaniel offered a warm, genuine smile. He raised his hands, ensuring they were in perfect view, and his fingers moved with the effortless, native fluidity that only comes from years of deep, personal immersion. "Hello," Nathaniel signed, his facial expressions perfectly matching the casual, friendly tone of his hands. "My name is Nathaniel. This is my son, Leo. This party is very boring, isn't it?" The reaction was instantaneous. Mia's eyes widened to the size of saucers. Sophie actually dropped the shredded napkin. They stared at Nathaniel as if he had just performed a miracle. In their heavily guarded, elite world, hearing strangers did not speak their language. They certainly didn't speak it with the casual, grammatical perfection and slang that Nathaniel used. Mia hesitated, looking at her sister, before tentatively raising her hands. "You know sign?" "Yes," Nathaniel signed back, leaning against the table so he was closer to their eye level. "My wife was deaf. We sign at home. Leo is deaf in one ear too." He nudged his son forward. Leo grinned, missing a front tooth, and signed enthusiastically, "Hi. The food here looks weird. Have you seen the waiters? They look like penguins." To emphasize his point, Leo puffed out his chest, pinned his arms to his sides, and did a perfect, waddling penguin walk in his little tuxedo. For the first time all evening, the silence surrounding the twins shattered. A bright, uninhibited burst of laughter erupted from Mia. Sophie joined in, the sound pure, loud, and entirely joyous. They began signing back furiously to Leo. A flurry of tiny hands exchanging thoughts about the stuffy adults, the weird food, and the heavy dresses they were forced to wear. Nathaniel watched them, a soft, melancholic smile playing on his lips, remembering Sarah. He poured a glass of water from the pitcher the nanny had ignored and handed it to the twin who had asked for it earlier. She took it, signing a quick, emphatic thank you with a beaming smile. Across the ballroom, Victoria Kensington was practically sprinting in her Tom Ford gown. She had shoved past a senator and ignored a shouted question from a tech journalist. Her mind was racing with terrifying scenarios. Harrison's threats were echoing in her head. Was this a reporter? A process server? A kidnapper? She reached the perimeter of the alcove, her chest heaving, ready to unleash a fury that would end the man's career. "Excuse me. Step away from my daughters immediately," Victoria commanded, her voice slicing through the surrounding noise like a blade. Nathaniel turned, surprised by the hostility. He saw a stunningly beautiful woman with fierce, terrified eyes glaring at him. But before Victoria could summon her security detail to drag him out, Mia and Sophie jumped up from their chairs. They ran not to their mother, but to the edge of the table, their hands flying in animated joy as they looked at Victoria. "Mom! Mom!" Sophie signed, her face glowing with an excitement Victoria hadn't seen in months. "He knows! He and the boy know our words! The boy acts like a penguin!" Victoria stopped dead in her tracks. The adrenaline drained from her body, replaced by a profound, hollow shock. She looked at her daughters. Their faces were flushed with genuine happiness. They weren't hiding. They weren't shut down. They were alive, engaged, and radiating joy. She slowly shifted her gaze to the man in the cheap tuxedo. He wasn't a threat. He was holding a glass of water, looking at her with a calm, understanding empathy that stripped away every defense the billionaire CEO had built around herself. In that fleeting second, amidst a room full of the world's most powerful people, Victoria realized a devastating truth. All her wealth, all her influence, and all her power could not buy the one simple, profound thing this stranger had just given her children in 30 seconds. "Stand down, Peters," Victoria commanded, her voice barely above a whisper, though it carried absolute authority. The towering head of security, who had been mere seconds away from grabbing Nathaniel's shoulder, instantly took a step back, melting into the periphery. Victoria remained frozen for a moment, absorbing the scene. Her daughters, usually so guarded and fragile in these environments, were vibrant. Mia was giggling silently, covering her mouth, while Sophie enthusiastically signed a story about their strict tutor to Leo. Victoria finally stepped forward, the silk of her gown rustling. "I apologize," she said, addressing Nathaniel. Her tone was a complex mixture of defensive CEO and relieved mother. "I am very protective of them. We don't usually have guests approach them directly." Nathaniel stood up, his posture relaxed, unbothered by the immense wealth and power radiating from the woman before him. "No apology needed. You're doing your job as a mom. I'm Nathaniel Brooks. This is my son, Leo." "Victoria Kensington," she replied, offering a perfectly manicured hand. Nathaniel shook it. His grip was firm, his palms slightly calloused, the hands of a man who worked with the earth, not spreadsheets. "I know who you are, Miss Kensington. It's your house. But for what it's worth, no kid should have to sit in the corner of a party like a museum exhibit." The bluntness of his statement made Victoria bristle, but the truth in his eyes extinguished her anger. He wasn't judging her. He was stating a fact she already knew. Before she could respond, Leo tugged on Nathaniel's jacket. "Dad, milkshakes." "You promised," the boy signed, his expression completely serious. Nathaniel chuckled, signing back. "I know, buddy. We're going." He looked at Victoria. "It was nice meeting you, and it was a pleasure meeting your girls. They're incredibly bright." He turned to the twins, signing a warm goodbye, telling them to watch out for the penguin waiters. Victoria watched them walk away, father and son hand in hand, navigating the sea of billionaires as if they were nothing more than trees in a park. When she looked back down, Mia and Sophie's faces had fallen. The spark was gone. The isolation had returned, heavier than before. 2 days later, the reality of Harrison's threat crashed down on Victoria. She sat in the sterile, glass-walled conference room of Cravath, Swain, and Moore, one of Manhattan's most ruthless law firms. Her lead family attorney, a sharp-featured man named Gregory Davies, slid a thick manila folder across the polished mahogany table. "Harrison isn't bluffing, Victoria," Gregory said grimly. "His legal team is petitioning for full custody, citing emotional neglect and an inability to provide a suitable communication environment. They have sworn affidavits from 3 of your former nannies, detailing your struggle with ASL and the girls' resulting behavioral withdrawal. The judge assigned to this case, Judge Eris Campbell, is notoriously traditional. If Harrison paints you as an absentee corporate machine who can't even speak to her own deaf children, you will lose." Victoria stared at the folder, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. "I have dyspraxia, Gregory. It affects my fine motor skills. I am trying. I have tutors." "Tutors aren't enough," Gregory replied gently but firmly. "You need fluency. You need a bond the judge can see. And you need it before the hearing in 8 weeks." That night, alone in her sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, Victoria couldn't sleep. She walked into the girls' adjoining bedrooms. They were fast asleep, their breathing synchronized. She remembered the genuine, unbridled laughter she had witnessed at the gala. She remembered the calloused hands of the landscape architect. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Victoria's private investigator had delivered a complete dossier on Nathaniel Brooks. He was 32, a widower. His late wife, Sarah, had been a deaf advocate and teacher. He was currently the lead architect for the Brooklyn Green Canopy project, a firm struggling with budget deficits. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Park Slope, debt-free but far from wealthy, entirely devoted to his son. At noon, Victoria's matte black armored SUV pulled up to a muddy construction site in Brooklyn. Wearing a tailored charcoal pantsuit and Louboutin heels, she stepped out into the dirt, ignoring the stares of the construction crew. She found Nathaniel kneeling in a patch of overturned soil, reviewing a set of blueprints on a makeshift plywood table. "Mr. Brooks?" she called out. Nathaniel looked up, wiping dirt from his forehead with the back of his wrist. He looked surprised, but not intimidated. "Miss Kensington, you're a long way from the Hamptons. Watch your step. We just laid the irrigation lines." Victoria didn't beat around the bush. "I need your help, Nathaniel, and I am willing to pay very well for it." He slowly stood up, brushing off his jeans. "I design parks, Miss Kensington. I don't think you need a playground at your estate. I don't need an architect. I need an immersion teacher," Victoria said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "My ex-husband is trying to take full custody of my daughters. He's using my inability to communicate fluently in ASL as his primary weapon. My dyspraxia makes formal learning environments useless for me. I freeze, I panic. But you made it look effortless. You made them laugh in 30 seconds. Nathaniel's expression softened. The mention of a custody battle and the girl's well-being hit a nerve. "I want to hire you," Victoria continued, stepping closer, ignoring the mud ruining her shoes. "Move into the guest house at the estate for the next 2 months. Bring Leo. Work with Mia and Sophie. Be their companion. But more importantly, teach me. Teach me how to speak to my children the way you speak to your son. I will cover your current salary tenfold, and Aura Innovations will fully fund the $3 million deficit of this Green Canopy project." Nathaniel stared at her. It was a staggering amount of money. It would secure Leo's college fund, save his firm, and complete the park his late wife had helped him dream up. But it meant stepping into the crosshairs of a billionaire's bitter divorce. "I'm not a certified tutor, Victoria," he warned. I don't need a certificate. I need a father who knows how to love his kid in the language my daughters need, she replied, her voice breaking slightly, a rare crack in the CEO's armor. Please. Nathaniel looked out over the muddy park, then back at the desperate mother in front of him. 2 months, and Leo and the girls make the rules for playtime, not your security team. Deal, Victoria breathed. Within a week, the atmosphere at the Kensington estate underwent a seismic shift. The sterile, quiet halls were suddenly filled with the thudding footsteps of children running. Nathaniel had dismissed the strict, clinical tutoring sessions the girls were used to. Instead, learning became kinetic. He had them in the massive greenhouse, hands covered in potting soil, signing the names of plants, bugs, and colors. Leo acted as the perfect bridge, a peer who normalized their language and matched their chaotic, 7-year-old energy. Mia and Sophie blossomed. The behavioral issues their former nannies had documented vanished, replaced by curiosity and a desperate hunger to communicate. For Victoria, the process was excruciatingly vulnerable. Every evening after her executive meetings, she would sit in the sunroom with Nathaniel. She hated failing. She was a woman who commanded boardrooms and dictated the future of global energy. Yet she fumbled basic sentence structures. Her hands would shake, her dyspraxia misfiring the signals from her brain to her fingers, resulting in clumsy, incorrect signs. One evening, after trying and failing to smoothly sign a bedtime story for the 4th time, Victoria slammed her hands down on the table, tears of profound frustration stinging her eyes. It's useless. I look like a fool. Harrison is right. I can't do this. Nathaniel didn't offer pity. He reached across the table and gently, firmly took her trembling hands in his. Stop thinking like an engineer, Nathaniel said softly, his voice a steady rumble in the quiet room. You're trying to execute a sequence of codes. ASL isn't code, it's emotion. It's painting a picture in the air. Sarah used to tell me that hearing people focus too much on the fingers and forget the face, the body, the soul behind the word. He guided her hands, slowing down the pace. Don't force the perfection. If your fingers slip, let them slip. Mia and Sophie don't care about perfect grammar. They care that you are trying. They care that their mother is looking them in the eye and fighting to reach them. Victoria looked into Nathaniel's eyes. The proximity, the warmth of his hands, and the raw honesty of his words sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with sign language. For the first time in her life, she felt truly seen, not as a CEO, not as a target, but as a flawed, terrified mother trying to survive. Again, Nathaniel signed, a gentle smile on his face. Take a breath. Under his patient, unorthodox guidance, Victoria began to improve. The rigid walls she had built around herself started to crumble. She began to laugh when she made a mistake. She started having breakfast with the kids, stumbling through messy, joyous conversations about pancakes and cartoons. The Kensington estate finally felt like a home. But in the shadows of high society, Harrison Caldwell was watching, and he was furious. His private investigators had quickly flagged Nathaniel's presence at the estate. Harrison realized that Victoria's defense was strengthening. If she walked into that courtroom with a genuine bond and improved communication with the twins, his entire case for custody and the leverage he needed to force her to surrender her voting shares in Aura Innovations would collapse. Harrison didn't play fair. He played to destroy. 3 weeks before the custody hearing, Nathaniel received an emergency summons from the senior partners of his architectural firm. When he walked into the boardroom in Manhattan, he didn't just find his bosses. He found Harrison Caldwell sitting at the head of the table, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers. Mr. Brooks, Harrison purred, steepling his fingers. Please, sit. Nathaniel remained standing, his jaw tightening. What is this? One of the senior partners, looking pale and sweating profusely, spoke up. Nathaniel. Mr. Caldwell's venture capital group just acquired the primary debt of our firm. He is now our majority stakeholder. Harrison smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. It's a simple business acquisition, Brooks, but it comes with restructuring. You see, I am not a fan of the Brooklyn Green Canopy project. I think it's a massive waste of resources. I'm planning to scrap it. Lay off the crew. Liquidate the assets. Nathaniel's blood ran cold. The project wasn't just a job. It was his tribute to Sarah. It was the livelihood of 50 workers. However, Harrison continued, standing up and buttoning his bespoke suit jacket, I am a reasonable man. I will fully fund the project, secure your pension, and guarantee your position as lead architect. All you have to do is pack up your son, walk out of Victoria's house today, and sign a sworn affidavit stating that Victoria's progress is a sham, a desperate PR stunt orchestrated by her lawyers. You want me to commit perjury to help you steal your children from a mother who loves them, Nathaniel said, his voice deadly quiet. I want you to be a smart father, Harrison countered, stepping closer. If you refuse, your firm goes bankrupt by Friday. You lose your job, your health insurance, and Leo's stability. Victoria is using you, Brooks. When the trial is over, she'll toss you back to the dirt where you belong. Take the deal, protect your own kid. Nathaniel stared at the billionaire. He felt the crushing weight of the ultimatum. He had fought so hard to rebuild a safe, stable life for Leo after Sarah died. Going toe-to-toe with a man who had limitless resources and zero morality was financial suicide. Without a word, Nathaniel turned and walked out of the boardroom. When he returned to the Kensington estate that evening, Victoria knew instantly that something was wrong. Nathaniel was unusually quiet during dinner. Afterward, while Leo and the girls were watching a movie, Victoria found Nathaniel in the garden, staring blankly at the dark horizon. "What happened?" Victoria asked, stepping beside him. Nathaniel didn't look at her. He laid out the entire encounter in the boardroom: the debt acquisition, the threat to his firm, the affidavit. As he spoke, Victoria felt a cold, familiar rage ignite in her chest. Harrison wasn't just attacking her anymore. He was destroying the life of an innocent man who had done nothing but help them. "I have to protect Leo, Victoria," Nathaniel said softly, his voice laced with grief. "I can't lose my job. I can't go bankrupt." Victoria stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Her emerald eyes were blazing with a ferocity that made empires tremble. "You are not going bankrupt, Nathaniel," Victoria said, her voice vibrating with absolute, unshakable resolve. "Harrison thinks he can buy the board. He forgets who he is dealing with. He plays with venture capital. I build the grid that powers this city." She pulled out her phone, dialing her lead corporate attorney. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel asked, startled. "Harrison wants to play corporate warfare?" Victoria said, a dangerous, brilliant smile spreading across her face. "Fine. I'm going to show him exactly why I'm the CEO and he is just my ex-husband. We are going to war." The Manhattan skyline was still pitch black at 4 a.m., but the executive war room on the top floor of Aura Innovations was blindingly bright. Victoria Kensington stood at the head of a massive marble conference table, a cup of black coffee in her hand. Flanking her were her CFO, her lead corporate counsel, and 3 senior partners from Goldman Sachs, who had been pulled from their beds at her direct command. Harrison Caldwell thought he was playing a game of chess by acquiring the debt of Nathaniel's architectural firm. He had severely underestimated the woman he was trying to corner. Victoria didn't play chess. She played scorched earth. Harrison's flagship venture fund, Vanguard Apex, is highly leveraged, Victoria said, projecting a complex web of financial data onto the glass screen behind her. 30% of their current portfolio relies on the successful rollout of the new Hudson Yards residential towers. Towers that cannot open next quarter without the proprietary Green Grid energy batteries manufactured exclusively by my company. Her CFO, a seasoned veteran of Wall Street, swallowed hard. "Victoria, if we pull the battery contracts, we face breach of contract lawsuits." "Let them sue," Victoria replied, her voice ice cold. "By the time it gets through the courts in 3 years, Vanguard Apex will have bled out. I want a notice of indefinite supply chain delay sent to the Hudson Yards developers by 6 a.m. Simultaneously, I want you to leak a memo to the Wall Street Journal that Aura Innovations is reconsidering its partnerships with any venture group hostile to urban philanthropic projects, specifically citing Harrison's recent hostile takeover of the Brooklyn Green Canopy Project. By 9 a.m., the financial world was in an uproar. Panicked investors, terrified of losing Aura Innovations' crucial tech, began aggressively pulling their capital from Harrison's funds. By noon, Vanguard Apex's stock had plummeted by 14%. Harrison's board of directors, realizing they were caught in the crossfire of a billionaire's bitter divorce, turned on him instantly. At 2 p.m., Nathaniel Brooks was sitting in his modest Park Slope apartment, packing a cardboard box, preparing to tell Leo they were moving. A sharp knock at the door interrupted him. It wasn't Harrison's lawyers. It was Victoria. She stepped into the small apartment, looking entirely out of place in her sharp white blazer, but her smile was soft. She handed Nathaniel a thick, leather-bound folio. "What is this?" Nathaniel asked, weary and confused. "Open it," she said. Nathaniel flipped the cover. Inside were legally binding transfer deeds and incorporation papers. His architectural firm's debt had not just been cleared. The entire firm had been purchased and reorganized under a new, untouchable philanthropic trust, fully endowed by Aura Innovations. Nathaniel was listed as the sole acting director and CEO. Harrison's board forced him to sell the debt back at a 20% loss this morning to stop the bleeding, Victoria explained, stepping closer. "He has no leverage over you. You don't answer to him. You don't even answer to me. The firm is yours, Nathaniel. The park is safe. Leo is safe." Nathaniel stared at the documents, his hands trembling slightly. He looked up at the woman who had just moved mountains and manipulated global markets simply to protect him and his son. "Victoria," he breathed, overwhelmed. "You didn't have to start a corporate war for me. You taught me how to speak to my daughters," Victoria said softly, reaching out to gently touch his arm. "There is no mountain I wouldn't burn down for you." 6 weeks later, the air inside the Manhattan family court at Foley Square was thick with tension. Judge Eris Campbell, a notoriously strict and traditional magistrate, peered down from the bench. Harrison Caldwell sat at the plaintiff's table, looking uncharacteristically pale and furious. His financial empire was still recovering from Victoria's blitzkrieg, but he was banking everything on this custody hearing. Harrison's high-priced attorney spent 2 hours painting a damning picture. He paraded out the former nannies, who testified to the twins' isolation and Victoria's debilitating dyspraxia, arguing that the mother was physically and emotionally incapable of providing the immersive ASL environment the deaf children required. "Miss Kensington is a brilliant CEO," the lawyer concluded, pacing before the judge. "But she is a phantom in her own home. These girls need a parent who can actually communicate with them, not just buy them things." Gregory Davies, Victoria's attorney, stood up. He didn't call character witnesses or child psychologists. He simply called his client to the stand. Victoria walked to the witness box. She wore a simple, elegant navy dress. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she kept her gaze steady. She looked past the judge, past the sneering face of her ex-husband, and found the second row of the gallery. There, sitting next to a deeply supportive Nathaniel and a grinning Leo, were Mia and Sophie. "Miss Kensington," Gregory began softly, "the plaintiff alleges you are unable to connect with your daughters. How do you respond?" Victoria took a deep breath. She didn't look at her lawyer. She kept her eyes locked entirely on her little girls. She remembered Nathaniel's words in the sunroom. "Stop thinking like an engineer. It's emotion. It's a picture in the air." Slowly, Victoria raised her hands. Her fingers, which had once trembled with frustrating inaccuracy, moved with a deliberate, emotional grace. She spoke aloud for the court reporter, but her true voice was in her hands, her facial expressions, and her soul. "I was afraid," Victoria signed, the movement smooth and continuous. "I built companies because machines are easy to understand, but I didn't know how to understand the two most important people in my world. I was wrong to hide." Mia and Sophie leaned forward in the wooden pews, their eyes wide. Their mother wasn't fumbling. She wasn't relying on an interpreter. She was speaking directly to their hearts. "I am learning," Victoria continued, a single tear slipping down her cheek as she signed. "I will make mistakes. My hands are not perfect, but my love for you is perfect. I will never, ever stop talking to you. We are a family." In the gallery, the twins didn't wait for permission. They both raised their hands, their faces glowing with a fierce, unconditional love. "We know, Mom. We love you. We are family." The courtroom was completely silent, save for the scratch of the court reporter's machine. Judge Campbell, who had seen thousands of bitter disputes, lowered her reading glasses, visibly moved by the raw, undeniable proof of a mother's devotion. The connection was profound, immediate, and unbreakable. Harrison Caldwell sank into his chair, realizing in that exact moment that he had lost everything. He couldn't buy that bond, and he certainly couldn't break it. Judge Campbell struck her gavel. Joint custody remained, but primary physical custody and educational control were awarded entirely to Victoria. 3 months later, the Brooklyn Green Canopy project officially opened to the public. The sun shone brightly over the newly planted oak trees and the expansive, accessible playgrounds. Away from the press and the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Victoria sat on a wooden park bench, her head resting comfortably on Nathaniel's shoulder. A few yards away, Mia, Sophie, and Leo were communicating in a rapid, joyous flurry of signs, chasing each other through a splash pad. Victoria watched them, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She didn't need the validation of a boardroom anymore. She had found her voice, and more importantly, she had found her family. In the end, Victoria's billions couldn't buy the connection her daughters desperately needed. It took Nathaniel's courage to break the silence of their gilded cage, turning a fleeting intervention into a powerful, blended family. They proved that the most profound language is felt entirely within the heart. If you loved this dramatic story of resilience and unconditional love, hit the like button and subscribe for more daily storytelling.
Hi, my name is Shalom Royal Hunger, the owner and manager of Shalom Royal Hunger. After watching the video, CEO's deaf twin daughters sat alone at the party. The single dad's sign language made them smile. I'd really like to know what you think. How did the story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the simple kindness in taking the time to make someone feel included. The single dad didn't seem focused on impressing anyone at the party. He just noticed two children sitting alone and reached out in a way that made them feel seen and understood. Sometimes the smallest gestures can mean the most, especially to people who are used to feeling left out or overlooked. Do you think the CEO realized how meaningful that moment was for her daughters right away, or did it hit her later? And have you ever experienced a moment where someone's kindness completely changed the atmosphere around you? I think stories like this remind us that empathy and effort matter more than status, money, or appearances, especially in everyday interactions. If this story touched you in some way, I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, compassion, and unexpected human connection, feel free to like and subscribe, only if you'd like to see more.